Enjoy the sun. Oh, yes. Wishes for this HWA, Writers in Love. We're here for Valentine's Day. We're here for horror. We're here for StokerCon. There's so much going on. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to the authors who have taken their time to be here for this panel today, and I'm going to give it to them because I think they know much better what they're about to talk about than I do. All right, first off, we have Brian Asman. Brian is a writer, actor, and director from San Diego. He's the author of Good Dogs and Man, Fuck This House and Other Disasters, both forthcoming from Blackstone. His other books include I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here Today from Eraserhead Press, Our Black Hearts Beat as One, Neo Arcana, Nunchuck City, Jailbroke, and Return of the Living Elves. He's recently published short stories in Pulp Modern, American Cannibal, and Kelp, and comics in Tales of Horrorgasm. As a film he co-wrote and produced, A Haunting in Ravenwood, is available now on DVD and video on demand. His short, I don't know what today is. His short, Real Trouble, won Best Short Film at Gen Con 2022 and Best Horror Short at the Indie Gathering. Brian holds an MFA from UCR Palm Desert. He's represented by Dunham Literary Inc. And find him on social media at The Brian Asman or his website, brianasmanbooks.com. Woohoo! Next up, we have Casey Grifant. Get ready. Casey writes horror, fantasy, science fiction, and Weird West tales. Dozens of her short stories have been published globally in podcasts, magazines, and Stoker-nominated anthologies. Her debut Weird Western novel, Melinda West, Monster Gunslinger, is described as a blend of Bonnie and Clyde meets The Witcher and Supernatural. She is the co-chair and founder of the San Diego Horror Writers Association and member of numerous writing organizations, including the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. You can learn more at caseygriffin.com. And then, Ias McGill discovered her passion for horror at a young age with vivid memories of watching Night of the Living Dead at 7. As an editor, McGill has curated compelling anthologies such as Wiley Writers Presents Tales of Foreboding and Deep Cuts. As a versatile writer, she explores both fiction and nonfiction realms. Her debut novel series, Magica, has recently captivated readers. In addition to her literary pursuits, McGill is a dedicated mental health advocate and an author of the insightful self-help book, Reveal Your Wings. A member of the Horror Writers Association and the Romance Writers of America, she brings a diverse perspective to her work. Having retired from teaching English, McGill now dedicates her days to the craft of writing. Although she considers herself a lifelong Californian, she currently resides in Phoenix. Visit her at iasmcgill.com. And with that, I just keep that energy going for them. They're here. You're here. Saturday. Let's do it. Thank you.
Start? Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I think most of you know what the Horror Writers Association is, but if not, it's the premier horror association international. It has local chapters, so San Diego has a chapter, and every year it hosts what's called StokerCon, which is kind of the premier horror event. It covers literature, film, comics, gaming, mostly literature, but a little bit of everything. This year we're very excited to host it in San Diego. It's going to be May 30th to June 2nd at the San Diego Marriott Mission Valley. Work hard at work on the programming, but there's all kinds of cool components to it. There's a film festival competition, there's an academic portion, Librarians Day, there's book signings, there's readings, there's the banquet is sort of the central piece of StokerCon, where the StokerCon awards are given out. And it's a big deal. It's also a great way to find new reading material. Every year, if you look and see who won the Stokers, you can find really good short stories, novels, novellas, I think is a category, all kinds of good stuff. So that is StokerCon. One thing I think the public doesn't realize is that it's actually free to go into the dealer's room where vendors have their table set up. So you can shop local books, you can shop there's like cool artsy stuff, so that section is open to the public. You don't need a ticket. and then also the author signings, which are usually Saturday. We'll have the schedule up soon, but that is also open to the public. So if you see one of your favorite authors is there, you can come on by and get your book signed.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to do general backgrounds and then recommendations?
Yeah, however you want.
Okay. I'm E.S. McGill, and I used to live here in San Diego for 30 plus years. Right now, my husband and I, we moved to Phoenix. Doesn't mean anything, just cheaper there. We were retired. Okay, doesn't mean anything. I started writing, I knew I was going to be a writer in 4th grade. Teacher assigned a short story. I remember the experience to this day. She praised my descriptive writing, and I decided, oh, I like this feeling. I like that a lot, so that nailed it. I won my first literary award when I was in 6th grade, aka a writing contest. And then I went on to write for my high school newspaper, college magazine. I wanted to tell a story that's related to loving horror. When I was a junior at San Diego State, they had this book. The library had a book collecting contest. Yeah, that's a real thing, right? And in 2002, they actually started a national collegiate book collecting contest. So I'm like, oh, I've got a big collection of books, horror books. Let me enter them, right? So you're supposed to take in 3 or 4 boxes of your books and a narrative and a bibliography and everything else. And took it in, and they put it on carts, and SDSU put it on display. And then we all showed up. All the participants showed up that day for the winner, and it was the traditional college stuff: political science, history, classic literature, and there's me, horror, right? Always considered the poor stepchild, highly maligned genre. So then it got down to two people. It was me and a woman with women's studies. And it was just like a Miss America moment where I'm like, oh my God, And when they announced my name, it was like, wow, I beat out all these other collections. The librarians actually chose horror. So then for a whole month, the librarians feted me, and I got to speak at their luncheon, and it made horror really important for a month out there. I was a teacher for 20 plus years for San Diego Unified School District. I retired. I was an English teacher, of course. I retired in 2021, and I always divide my life now as BR before retirement and AR after retirement. So BR before retirement, things I wrote. I did anthologies. I edited 2 anthologies before I retired. This is the one that I'm most proud of, Deep Cuts. I also did short stories, published in anthologies, all of that kind of stuff. But what really mattered to me was after retirement. I retired June 30th, 2021, and on July 1st, 2021, my friend Angel Lee McCoy, who is the webmaster for the HWA, started a writing organization called Wiley Writers. And in this group, we meet Monday through Friday. Writers, they don't ever it's like, I don't feel like writing right now, We eliminated that. We meet Monday through Friday. We have a 2-hour morning session, a 2-hour break, and a 2-hour session in the afternoon. We've been doing it for two and a half years, and we've published almost between most of the group, maybe a couple dozen books in that time. So we've become very prolific. People in that group, S.G. Brown, Alan Baxter, Lee Murray, Jen Brozak. These are pretty big names in the horror world. Ali Yan is in it. Ali is a San Diego chapter member. Who else is in there? Yvonne Navarro, who is, I don't want to say old timer, but she is one of the original she was one of the original starters of the HWA.
Oh, cool.
She was right there at the beginning. She was the historian and all of that. And then Weston Oaks. And if you don't know Weston Oaks, Weston unexpectedly passed in November. But there's a core of us. So it's a big group, but there's really only like 4 people who meet like every single day religiously. So there's myself, there's Angel, who's the webmaster, and there's Lauren Rhodes, who's known as the Queen of Cemeteries. She writes a lot of the cemetery books, 99 cemeteries you should visit before you die, or 199, or I think she's now in the 200s. And then our newest member is Marcia De Filippo, and I can like talk about this now because somebody let the cat out of the bag during the fall. But Marcia is Stephen King's personal assistant for 30 years, and she retired, and she is now a full-time writer, and she writes cozy mysteries and romance. And I always tease her that she will never get away from horror people. She's just like destined to be with us forever and forever. So that is, so in that time, what I have published after retirement, I do a little side business where I do trackers for workbooks for writers, sprint trackers, accounting trackers, just books like that. Last summer, I published, it's a nonfiction book. It's called Reveal Your Wings, and it's about how I underwent ketamine infusion therapy for depression and anxiety. And in 2 weeks, I was cured of 40 plus years of that mental illness. So if anybody is interested in this, I have cards that you can just pick up afterwards, or you can talk to me. Other things that I've published after retirement, we did, 4 of us did these anthologies within the organization. It's Wiley Writers Presents Tales of. Lisa Morton is also in our group. She's big time in the HWA. She was president and made a lot of huge changes when she was there. Lisa did the first one, then Lauren Rhodes did an anthology, then Angeline McCoy, and then there's me, and I did Tales of Foreboding. So I do horror, but last October I published my first novel, Magica. It's the first in the series. It is not horror. It is paranormal thriller, but it has a lot of horror tropes in it. It's not a cozy. I'm just going to tell you right now. It's not hardcore. It's not horror, but people die in it horribly sometimes. And I no, really horribly. Yeah, people can attest to that. I didn't flinch. I bring horror sensibilities to these books, and I have to be careful with that because in the next book coming out, the second book of Magica, I was writing this little section, and I'm like, I have one of the characters. He's like 9 years old, and he's just with this group of people, and they're like werewolves. And but they've also been doing some like cannibalism. Yeah, I know. I'm still a horror writer, okay? And I thought, okay. So they give him a hamburger, and it's got, human flesh in it. And I'm like, that's so cool as I'm writing it. And then I start telling like my husband, it's like, yeah. And the kid eats like human flesh, and I'm like, maybe not. Maybe that's totally the wrong audience, and I really shouldn't go there. So you've got to know your audience. So that is who I am as a writer.
Nice. That's a good intro. Okay, so how I got into writing horror. So as a kid, I always enjoyed horror. Like, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Loved Twilight Zone, X-Files, that kind of thing. I always loved to write, but I was writing more fantasy and sci-fi for the longest time. But they always had kind of sad, disturbing endings. But I didn't identify as a horror writer actually until I came to San Diego, and I was looking for a writing group to join. And in my research, I found, Horror Writers Association. The nearest chapter was LA. I did not want to drive up to LA every month. So I started asking around, and there are a ton of awesome horror writers in San Diego. So I started the chapter. and realized, oh, I am a horror writer, you know? And I found my people, and it was really nice because I had joined sci-fi groups, fantasy groups, and those were great, but something about the horror community just clicked really well for me. I think part of it is the variety in horror. It's, you know, you can have kind of the fun adventure horror, you can have really extreme disturbing horror, and everything in the middle, right? Monsters, serial killers, ghosts. I mean, there's so much variety and something for everyone. So I really enjoy that. And in our chapter, we have people who write kids' horror books, people who write poetry, people who write screenplays. So it's a really awesome variety. People who write games. So I started writing. I had a pretty big writer's block for a long time, and I had this novel. I was reworking it for years, and then I started writing short stories, and that really helped me do a reset. And I found I love short stories. Started getting published. Started getting more connected to editors, and then a few of my short stories were what's called weird westerns. So that's a story that takes place in the Old West, but it has some speculative element to it. So it might have ghosts or monsters or, you know, sci-fi fantasy elements. And I had a few short stories that were well received. So I decided to write a book with the characters. And part of it was sort of a gender swap. So the main character is a stoic female gunslinger, and her partner is sort of the charmer. And they fight monsters in an alternate version of the Old West. This came out last year from Bridges Gate Press, and it was well received, which I was very happy about. I'm going to have the second one come out next year, so that's exciting. And yeah, that's pretty much how I came to be.
Cool. Okay, so Brian, and I am also sort of an accidental horror writer, also kind of weirdly. I have always loved writing. I remember when I was in third grade, I actually got in a little bit of trouble because my friends and I would like write these stories and like have each other be characters in the stories. And okay, so at the time, like, you know, all the slashers were really big, like Jason Voorhees and like, you know, Michael Myers and Freddy and everything like that. None of us had actually seen the movies, though. We had just, like, you know, we had seen, like, either trailers or, like, you know, on Halloween, seen kids dressed up like them or things like that. So we didn't really, we just knew the iconography. We didn't know what, like, who they really were, what they did. So, like, you know, we'd be writing stories where it's like, oh, I'm skateboarding down the street, and then Freddy jumps off of a rooftop and attacks us or something like that, you know, because we knew he had the claws and everything like that, the razor blade glove. So my friends and I are like kind of writing these stories, kind of like Exquisite Corpse type thing, and then we end up getting into like a couple fights because we start killing each other off in it, and everyone's like, we're 8 years old, and everyone's mad that like, you know, their friend killed them off in the story or something like that. So my teachers like eventually has to go, okay guys, hold on. You're not allowed to make each other characters in stories anymore. Like, she's like, I love the creativity. I love that you're like writing like this, but like, stop killing each other off and stop fighting about it. And like, also like, why are you writing about Jason Voorhees? You're 8 years old. So that was my one of my early memories of writing. So I always kind of wanted to be a writer, and I always figured I'd do something with it. You know, growing up, just would write on and off, and like I also did a lot more kind of like sci-fi type stuff. I remember like when I was a teen, I read a lot more like sci-fi and fantasy and things like that. I always had a soft spot for horror, you know, and I remember reading like, you know, the Goosebumps books and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and all that stuff. But I always kind of like gravitated, at that time I was gravitating more towards like the sci-fi and the fantasy and like sort of like the epic fantasy where there's like, you know, the orphan who like, you know, finds a magic sword and yada yada. And I think that resonated with me because I was like adopted, and I like the idea of someone who's like a nobody becoming like a somebody essentially. And, you know, it's like the power fantasy version of that basically. So I, you know, that was more what I was into as a teen. And then like, I started getting really self-conscious about being a nerd and started reading like a lot more crime fiction. Because, you know, when you're a kid, you're stupid. And like, it's not okay to like the stuff you like sometimes. Like you have to worry about what other people are going to think about what you like. And then I went to college and I majored in English, and I wanted to be a writer, and I was like, you know, I need to write literary fiction. I need to write serious literary fiction. And so I'd like start these stories that didn't go anywhere because the thing was I didn't give a shit about serious literary fiction. Like it didn't interest me at all. It's just what I thought I should be writing, right? And I think that is my number one piece of advice for anyone who's aspiring to be a writer and finds themselves like kind of starting things and abandoning them, starting things and abandoning them. Just ask yourself, are you writing the right genre? Are you writing something that you're excited about? Are you writing the stuff that you want to read? Because I realized I was not writing necessarily the stuff I wanted to read. And when I did, it was stuff that was like never going to go anywhere. You know, I would write these weird absurdist stories. Like I remember I wrote one about like this shut-in whose neighbor starts stealing his newspapers, and like, you know, he like decides to investigate it, and it's just like kind of like almost a ripoff of Confederacy of Dunces, frankly. But you know, whatever. So let's fast forward a couple years, right? So I had this thing where I'm like, I'm going to be a writer someday, and I always had in my mind by like the age of 35 or so, I'd walk into Barnes and Noble, and there's my books, you know, like right in the front with maybe like a cardboard cutout of me or something like that, and like whatever supermodel I'm dating at the time. Yeah, you know, I've always had a vivid fantasy life, which is why I think I'm an okay writer. So anyway, I got to that age, 35, and I realized, I was like, wait a second, you haven't done anything. You had all these plans that you were gonna, you know, you're gonna do this, and this by this age. So I kind of like freaked out and like realized I was probably gonna be dead soon. Not really, but like, you know, just the idea of mortality kind of like got stuck in my head. So I decided that I was going to like write every day essentially, and anything I started, I was just gonna finish no matter how terrible it was. And I think that gave me the impetus to that first year, I wrote one novel, finished my first novel ever, and then I wrote like 16 short stories. And so like just the mental experience of finishing a novel, like getting over that hump was huge. And then it made every one after that so much easier to write. And the thing was, like, when I pivoted to writing horror, that's when I was able to actually like be productive and like finish things because I was writing something that I was super interested in. And so since then, I've had a bunch of really cool experiences, and a lot of it's been because of the HWA. Like that's how I met Kristina and Eunice, and through the local HWA meetings, and that's how I found a lot of really cool fiction that's gone on to inspire me as well. Because like up to that point, I had read like Stephen King, Joe Hill, some Adam Neville, like I love John Connolly and stuff like that. Some of the old classic stuff, but like I wasn't reading as many contemporary horror voices. And when I started doing the HWA stuff, I was like, I'm going to go to conventions and like meet these people, so I should probably read their books. So I have like, when I run into like David Agranoff or something at a convention, I can be like, hey man, I really like that book you wrote, just to have something to say, because I get terrible social anxiety and I feel like an idiot if I don't have anything cool to say. So anyway, that's but it's been just to summarize, because I know I've been talking for a while, it's been a pretty cool journey last couple of years. I had one book kind of go viral called Man, F This House, and you can buy it up front. And I will be happy to sign it. But that went like super viral a couple years ago, led to a film and TV deal. And then Blackstone decided to buy the rights to it, and they're going to reissue it next year with additional short stories added to it. And then this year in October 1st, my werewolf novel, Good Dogs, comes out from Blackstone. It is essentially Friday the 13th meets the Howling. So it's a group of werewolves go off to the woods to go wolf owls in peace, and then a slasher starts picking them off one by one. So it's the Neapolitan ice cream of werewolf and slasher styles. And then, of course, also right now, because it's Valentine's Day, my most recent novella, Our Black Hearts Beat as One, went through a bad breakup a couple years ago and decided to channel all that negative energy into writing an occult horror love story. It's kind of it's weird, it's different, and generally it's like, you'll either love it or you'll hate it. And I'm okay with either one, as long as you read it. So I get paid either way.
As long as they buy it, right?
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Put it on your shelf, forget about it.
Burn it, I don't care.
Doesn't matter.
Yep.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, thank you all, by the way, for coming. I know on a beautiful day in San Diego, it's really tough to get people to come to an indoor event. So, mad props to all of you.
Talking about thank yous, I'm going to thank David Agranoff right there, who's hiding in the back row, for book events. We're just gonna call them book events because it's a little bit different. They're not really signings. They're
Countdown to StokerCon.
it's a countdown to StokerCon, right? And did you tell them that you're the chair?
I'm the chair.
There you go. I'm trying to make this girl like brag this up. It's like, come on, tell people, you know. We're gonna start getting into the recommendations right now. I've got a question for you, Brian. So so you were like writing these stories and about Freddie and Jason, all of it. Were you like, so you were like 8 years old, and was it like the 80s?
It was it was like 89, 90, something like that.
Okay, yeah. Because that whole 80s decade was, you're making yourself younger than you really are. Don't tell them. That whole 80s decade was really very much about film and the VCR and going to Blockbuster and finding all the horror movies and all of that. So just interesting that you hadn't seen them, but they really influenced you.
I mean, I was young at the time, and my parents were a bit strict about what I could watch. But I think just like from a superficial standpoint, like when I saw a trailer or saw a commercial on TV or something, and also the other weird thing is thinking back in elementary school, like on Halloween, everyone would dress up, right? And there'd be kids dressed as like Freddy Krueger, which for an elementary age student dressing as like a child murderer is really
I had a student do that just this year.
Yeah, which like I mean, mad props to them, but like yeah, it's kind of weird.
You're still doing it.
You're 8. You're not thinking this through, right? You're not thinking this through.
Yeah, or like Jason Voorhees, where it's like, oh, it's like a 7-year-old dressed as a character that's from a series that's known for just like brutal blood and boobs everywhere, you know. But anyway.
So my experience with horror, I am not an accidental horror person. I am an on-purpose horror person, and it all started with Saturday morning cartoons. Not the cartoons themselves, but what happened after the cartoons, which were the monster movies. Mm-hmm. So my first introduction into the horror tropes were the Universal films, Japanese monster movies. I did not have a mother that was strict about these things. In fact, we would sit together at night and we would watch all the horror movies. I was like 5 years old. Today would have been my mother's 88th birthday if she was here today, and she was a big horror lover. So that's how it started. And then, like Franny said in the introduction, I must have been about 7. This is like the early 1970s. I'm that old, yes. We were watching TV one night, my mom and myself. My sisters were probably asleep. They were younger. I'm 7. And back then, the reason why you had children is so they could go change the channel. You know, there's no remote control. You had to go change the channel. So I'm over there. We finished one program. I go over. I change the channel. I come across this movie, and it's black and white. And there's this couple, and they're in the cemetery. You know what movie this is?
Night of the
Living Dead. That's what it is. So I'm watching, and then I sit down and we're watching. And I'm like, oh no, this is too scary. I go over and change the channel again. Come back. No, I got to see more. And then change the channel again. Maybe like 5 times, and eventually we finished watching the whole entire thing. So I bring up the 1970s and as a really interesting time period to get into horror as a child, because there were all these phenomenal movies that were either made for film or they were made for TV specifically, and but they all ended up on TV, so we could watch them all. So here I was, 5 or maybe a little older, because a lot of this happened after Night of the Living Dead. So that was my leveling up into real horror, and not Japanese, just monster movies. Somebody that was really big at that time was Richard Matheson. Matheson had his fingers in so many projects. You could see on TV, and I did as a young age, Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. That is the Matheson book, I Am Legend, which is the most faithful adaptation, not the Will. What's his name?
Will Smith.
Will Smith. Not that. That's just not even. That's not even close.
His name out of your mouth.
When you get to the end of the movie, you're like, no, that's not what I Am Legend is about. That's not it. Matheson also wrote the book Hell House. So, Hell's House was made as a movie. Duel is a Steven Spielberg's first feature film. That was a Matheson short story. The Night Stalker was on TV at that time. Matheson wrote the first movie, wrote the second movie, but he was never involved in the TV series itself. Other people wrote that. We love Night Stalker, but the one thing that really stuck with me is this series called The Trilogy of Terror. Who's seen Trilogy of Terror? Yeah. Do we have enough chairs back there? Do you need chairs back there?
No, I just feel like standing.
Okay, all right.
We wrote the second most Twilight Zone.
Hi, my friend.
Yeah, and Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 feet. We can't forget about the gremlin on the wing. Oh, I gotta tell you this. So I was an English teacher, but being a horror person, I gotta get some horror in there, right? When I was teaching 7th grade, I don't know who put together the California anthology for 7th graders because it was brilliant.
Brains.
There were
Retired teacher. Yes.
There were Jack Finney stories in there. There was an episode of Twilight Zone in there. There was The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. That's how I ended my school year with the 7th graders. We did a huge Twilight Zone. And then I knew at the beginning of the year that at the end of the year I was going to show, the Matheson story, Nightmare at 20,000 feet. And I lived all year for that year to see those kids scream. But in the Trilogy of Terror, there were 3 Matheson stories. 2 were adapted by William F. Nolan, who wrote, what did he write?
Logan's Run.
Logan's Run. And he wrote it with?
George Clayton Johnson.
George Clayton Johnson, who wrote the great heist film?
Ocean's 11.
Ocean's 11. I bring this up.
I feel like this guy's a plant.
I bring this up because we're talking about the
genre historian.
We're talking about the HWA, and all these people are HWA members. I've met Matheson, and I met George Clayton Johnson, and William F. Nolan, and all those people. We are a small organization. We are a family. So the third installment in the Trilogy of Terror was a little piece he called Amelia, but the rest of us affectionately know it as the Zuni fetish doll episode. For 30 years, that thing chased me around in my dreams. Chased me around. I have something I call the Triumvirate of Terror. George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, the Trilogy of Terror episode with the Zuni fetish doll, and Matheson's Last Man on Earth, which is I Am Legend. I traumatized myself. I'm not going to lie. I was 7, 8 years old. I traumatized myself. I gave myself 30 plus years of horrific night terrors and nightmares, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Right now. Other great books that were made into movies in the 1970s. I'm just going to read this list, and I watched them all as a child before the age of 12. But look at me, I look perfectly normal, right? It's just a facade, okay? All right, so on TV during the 1970s was Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby, The Stepford Wives, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, Harvest Home, and The Other by Thomas Tryon, The Sentinel by Jeffrey Convents, Omen by David Seltzer, Audrey Rose, The Entity by Frank Felitta, Burned Offerings, Robert Marasco, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Jack Finney, The Haunting of Hill House, Shirley Jackson. And why I asked Brian that question about when did he see stuff is because, none of those books were accessible to me. I was 7. I'm not reading The Exorcist at 7, right? But later on as an adult, because I remembered all of these movies, as an adult I came back and read them all. And they are all wonderful pieces of literature. Then I leveled up after that in my teens. I was a voracious reader. My mother would say, get out of the house now and go do something. but I read all the time. A lot of horror wasn't accessible to kids. You know, you'd find a lot of fantasy, you know, read Ursula Le Guin, and you read Wrinkle in Time, and you read lots of fantasy books, but not horror. When I was in 10th grade, a neighborhood girl came to me, and she was a chain-smoking, tough girl. She wore a leather vest, and you know, she's like a senior, and she already had like a smoker's voice like this. She came to me, and she's like, "I heard you like horror." I was like, "Yeah, I do." She handed me 3 books. She handed me Loop, The Alsfane Horror, and They Thirst by Robert McCammon. And then this is where my love for McCammon. I mean, there are people like, oh yeah, Stephen King, whatever. Those of us who like really know or in the know, McCammon is the one that really matters. If I have a list for you guys of books, and they have little black hearts next to them. That's where, if you are not a horror reader, that's probably where you want to start. And the other ones that don't have hearts, if you're not a horror reader, don't start there, okay? So this one doesn't have a heart on it, but it's not bad. I mean, you can handle it, but I think, no, maybe not. I always give people, what?
You're such a teacher.
Our thing is like, you know, fall in love with horror. We want them to fall in love with horror. I don't want them to pick this up and go, oh my God, what are they talking about? You know?
Yeah, that's why I didn't bring like Womb or like The Big Head or anything like that. Like, you know, I just
the bizarro fiction stayed at home today, right?
Yeah.
No Carl Mel.
Yeah, there's some that are a little too much for most even horror
Right.
fans.
So if you are
Except
going
in
to,
Toronto.
if you're going to start with McCammon, I would say Blue World, his anthology. The story Chico will just bring you to tears. And then his other great short story, Nightcrawlers. And then if you want to read a horror adjacent book of his, Boy's Life. That is, oh my gosh, literary, beautiful, all of that.
Swan song.
So, well, McCammon, right? But I want them to start, right? I want them to fall in love. So we're gonna give them an entry point. We're like, you know, start with Blue World, start with Chico, start with Boy's Life, and then, you know, you can progress from there. I feel like I have to mention Stephen King, just because he's always been there. You know, he's been there since the early 70s. I don't know when I started reading him. It's just one of those things that always was there. But if you haven't read any Stephen King, I'd probably start with something simple like The Body in Different Seasons, which was the movie Stand By Me. And my favorite is The Stand. There's also Salem's Lot and The Shining. Next, I want to move to the next leveling up, which is when I worked at Walden Books. The late 80s, early 90s. This was an incredible time period for anthologies and great editors. If you are new into horror and you just want to read some good literary stuff, I recommend David Hartwell's Dark Descent. It covers older horror, contemporary horror. This is a very good book, and I have it in the list, so you don't have to write it down. Another great series that's accessible to people who don't like horror, and I wish I'd brought a copy because the covers are so, oh my God, this book is so heavy. All right, stay there. Okay. Is the Year's Best Fantasy and Horror by Ellen Datlow and Terry Windley. Beautiful covers, fantasy and horror and literary stories in them, just gorgeous. The other series to fall in love with is Year's Best Horror Stories by Carl Edward Wagner. He was the editor of that series from 1980 to 1994. Other great editors at the time, Kirby McCauley, who did Dark Forces, Douglas Winter, who did Primeval. Oh, here's a story. If you are not a horror person, do not read the story. If you are a horror person, Less Than Zombie. He did a parody of Less Than Zero. And it is literary, and it is gorgeous, and I'm sorry, you'll have nightmares. I'm all into nightmares. This was before this was like early 1980s, but if you want to read something literary, I suggest anything by Dennis Etchison. Wonderful, great literary writer who should have been a bigger deal in this country and just never quite reached his potential. Just never reached that audience that he really should have reached.
He also wrote one of the movies that never got made that I think is personally sad, the saddest that never got made. He wrote a version of Halloween 4, which is amazing. If you Google that, it's a very cool idea and very different than anything else the series has done.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. Dennis has passed on since then. Jeff Gelb, I got a cute story about Jeff Gelb. He did the Hot Blood series during that time period. I was at Comic-Con, and we're in the big ballroom, not that age. It was one of the other big ones. And you sit down, and people pass by, and you can read their name tags. And this guy walks by, and it says Jeff Gelb on it. I'm a nerd, right? Like, Jeff Gelb. Oh my God. So after, he wasn't even on the panel, he was just in the audience. So, I make my way over to him and I'm like, are you Jeff Gelb, the editor? He told me, he said that was like the best moment of his whole life. This random girl recognized that he was, an editor. Two great anthologies that I fell in love with that really need to be talked about. Oh, I want to talk about 3 stories to read. Nightcrawlers. You should read it, even if you're not into horror. Night That Missed the Horror Show, do not read that if you're not into horror. I made some typos here in the but I corrected it on my website because you've always got to have typos for the typo gods. You gotta. It doesn't matter how many times you've edited something, listen to it, have 20 people. There's always a typo, and that's for the typo gods. If you are not into horror, Tight Little Stitches in a Dead Man's Back by Joe Lansdale. Oh my God. Just bring you to tears. Just beautiful. A post-apocalyptic story about a father and his daughter who survived. It's just brilliant. The 2 anthologies, not for non-horror people, John Skipp and Craig Spector's Book of the Dead changed everything in extreme horror literature. And Paul Salmon's Splatterpunks, which later laid the foundation for bizarro fiction for Carlton Mellick III. Don't read that. We can read that, but you can't read that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, you might want to dip a toe into certain things before you get too weird.
Yeah.
All we're saying, we don't want to scare anyone off, but it's kind of
Black hearts mean safe, okay? Black hearts mean safe. And then, just to wrap it up, I'm just going to go over some favorite contemporary stuff that, you could fall in love with, you could read. 2 literary historical horror novels, The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova and The Terror by Dan Simmons. And I love just about anything from Dan Simmons. Song of Kali, I would say that's a safe bet too.
Yeah. Carrying Comfort is one of my favorites of his. It's
just beautiful, beautiful. Other safe books, like safe books, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's horror. It's not only so much safety there, right? Glenn Hirschberg, The Two Sams, his short story Mr. Dark's Carnival, wonderful. Paul Tremblay, who wrote The Cabin at the End of the World, where they did the movie, what is it called?
Knock at the Cabin.
Knock at the Cabin.
He's also one of our guests of honor.
He's a guest of honor. So yeah, if you come to buy books and go to the sim, you will meet Paul Tremblay there. That's a wonderful book. Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic. Zoji stages Baby Teeth, which is a modern bad seed. It's really bad. It's like you will not have children after you read Bad Teeth, Baby Teeth. Victor Laval's The Changeling, which was just on Apple, right? And Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians. And I want to say something about that book. There were people who complained. Stephen Graham Jones is a professor of English for the University of Colorado in Boulder. He is a Blackfoot Indian. And people complained about that book. They're like, why is he writing about basketball? Why is he writing about newspapers? It's like, take 1 minute, do some research, and you'll, have some cultural sensitivity, learn something. Because if you just did a little research, you would discover that basketball and newspapers are really important to Native American culture. So I know it's did that for a long time, but I drove 6 hours to get here. So I'm going to talk today. All right.
Okay, that was an awesome overview. I feel like I learned a lot.
Take one of the papers.
So my recommendations are around kind of split between two. I'm going to talk a little bit about weird westerns and then a little bit about feminist horror and indie horror, just kind of based on recent books I've read. So weird westerns, I mentioned earlier, is story that typically takes place in the Old West with speculative elements, and Joe Lansdale, Stephen King's Dark Tower, those kind of set the stage for the genre. But recently there's been a really interesting resurgence in the genre. It's become much more diverse, just all kinds of cool storytelling. There's one indie publisher called Death's Head Press. They do a series of splatter westerns, which is kind of the more extreme, it's kind of like splatter horror, right? The more extreme horror version of westerns. So you have a lot of violence, a lot of graphic descriptions. It's not my cup of tea, but people really enjoy it, and it's been very popular.
I was going to just chime in real quick. Fun fact, one of the books in that series, it's called Human-Shaped Fiends by Chandler Morrison. I'm actually a character in that book. So I highly recommend that book because I'm
Did you get killed off?
Sorry, do
She wants to know if you got killed off.
Oh, that would be a spoiler.
They do beautiful covers too for that series, so it's worth checking out if you're looking for something a little more extreme. Otherwise, there's all kinds of diverse horror Western horror out there. The one I read recently that I loved is called Lone Women by Victor LaValle, who did The Changelings. Yeah, it just came out in paperback, and it's very good. It's a classic Western story, but it's about these women kind of on their own. There's a very kind of speculative ghost kind of feeling to it. It was not very predictable. It really kept me reading. It was a quick read. Loved it. Mysterious Galaxy has it here, and he's such a talented storyteller.
Is he coming to?
I don't know. I hope so. That would be awesome.
He's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
He's really nice.
He is on Twitter. He's pretty active on Twitter.
He's on Facebook. He always responds to people.
Yeah, he seems like a very nice guy, and I think he has another TV deal he just announced.
Yeah, so the Terror, they're doing the third season of The Terror, which is an anthology series now.
Yeah, cool. That's on AMC, right?
Yeah. It's based on the book by Dan Simmons, but they turned it into an anthology series that's called The Terror, but there's a book called The Terror, and then the other seasons are not related to the book called The Terror.
And Dan's just gone as long as I get paid.
They're doing
right?
Victor's first novel for season 3.
Nice. Well, yes, this was a great one. Definitely recommend it if you want to try out the horror Western genre. And, okay, moving over to kind of indie-ish and feminist horror. I have to say the indie horror community is, really thriving right now. There's so many good books. So many cool, weird, different stories. I couldn't even list them all, but one author I love, she also does anthologies. She did the anthology that you're in, The American Cannibal.
American Cannibal.
Yeah, Rebecca Rowan. She does short stories. This is her second collection.
That's a great cover.
Isn't it? White Trash and Recycled Nightmares. And she has a third collection probably coming out soon. It's a great collection. She's very, she has spooky stuff, but also with underlying feminist tones. She's great. So this one's from Dead Sky Publishing. And if you aren't aware, there's a lot of indie publishers out there that focus on horror. So those are great spots to look to for recommendations, for something kind of different, off the beaten path. Other authors I love who write sort of feminist horror include Tiffany Brown, who's local, or she's in LA now. She wrote How Lovely to Be a Woman, which is a collection of short stories and poems that are all very feminist focused. Haley Piper, Laurel Hightower, Jim R. Moore. There's a lot of great authors in this space. I could go on, but those are some of the highlights. Another author I love who was actually at Mysterious Galaxy a few months ago, Kristina Henry. She wrote Good Girls Don't Die. She's written lots of books, but this is like my top recommendation for people right now. It's sort of genre defying. It has horror tropes in it. It has crime tropes. And you read the first chapter and you're like, what is going on? And it just carries you. It is like a real page turner. And it definitely has kind of a feminist theme to it as well. So yeah, right now this is my top recommendation. And it's funny, the blurb on the front is actually somebody else I would recommend, Rachel Harrison, who wrote Cackle and a bunch of other books that are also pretty feminist, fun to read. There are themes of witches and Cackle, and I think she has a werewolf one coming out. Yeah, so she's very, very good as well. Short stories, I think, are seeing a resurgence also, especially in the indie horror space. So that can be a great way to see different authors, like kind of in short form, right? So you get an anthology, you read it, you find new authors, which is awesome. This is the anthology I'm currently reading, Never Whistle at Night. It's a collection of indigenous horror stories. The editor is Shane Hawk, who's a San Diegan. And these are kind of modern tellings. They're a little historic, but they're not really Westerns. They're more modern day. And they're really good. So this one, Mysterious Galaxy has it. Definitely recommend it.
And Shane will be at StokerCon.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's it for me.
Sweet. All right. Well, when I was trying to come up with like recommendations, I was like, should I do like a theme or something like that? And ultimately I just decided, you know what? The theme is just books I've read recently that I loved. So these are generally more contemporary recommendations. Just because, like, I think it's really cool. Like, all the stuff that's going on in horror right now is really cool. And, like, there's a lot of ways you can get recommendations about, like, old, classic stuff. But these are all... Yeah, take the handout. But these are all kind of within the last 10 years or so. And I'm going to tell you what I love about each particular book. So starting with Mackenzie Kira's All You Need Is Love and a Strong Electric Current. This is, since Valentine's Day is coming up, this is actually a love story. It's a kind of a take on a Frankenstein type story about EMT who falls in love with her partner and then something bad happens. And it's her struggle to deal with that and figure out a way to achieve some sort of happiness. So this one's a lot of fun. Highly recommend it. It's also a pretty quick read. Next, Curse of the Reaper by Brian McCauley. So if you like slashers, this is a bit of a slasher book. It's kind of a love letter. It's a horror movies. So I love when horror books get meta. And so this one is about a fictional 80s slasher franchise and the attempts to make a new entry in like the 2000s, basically. And the actor who played the killer is being replaced by like some former child star who has a drug addiction. And it's kind of like, it's a really crazy, fun book. And, again, super meta. If you like stuff like Scream, that's like about horror, you'll really enjoy this one. A lot of fun to read. Next, Hex by Thomas Huvall. And so this one is, I would say this one is more, it's modern, but it's also a little bit more traditional than this. It's not really a meta take, but if you like witches and ghosts and things like that, this is about a town in upstate New York that is essentially being haunted by a witch and has been for like 300 years. And the ways that the witch affects the everyday lives of the people everyone in town knows about this. And everyone has like sort of a conspiracy they developed to keep outsiders from knowing about the hauntings for various reasons. But it's a very inventive and creative book. If you love witchy stuff, if you love like ghosty stuff, highly recommend this one. It's also a super fast read. I can tend to be kind of a slow reader, but I think I read this in about 3 days. Boom. next is Mayfly by C.J. Lead, which I think they probably have here. This came out last year. This was kind of marketed as a female-centric American Psycho. It's about a woman who works at an unnamed theme park in the LA area, and dresses as a princess every day, but she is also a psychotic killer. This is also actually also appropriate for Valentine's Day. It's also a bit of a love story. It's a bit of a love letter to LA, and it's about relationships and trying to find someone who's like you when you feel like you're not like anyone else. So I thought this was a lot of fun. Love the voice in it. Great book. And then finally, this is one of my favorite books the last 10 years, Experimental Film by Gemma Files. So this is, again, sort of a love letter to film itself. So this is sort of the lost film trope, where there's like a lost film from ages ago and spooky things happen when you watch it, sort of like that. But there's a lot of stuff about the Canadian film industry in here that's super interesting, and it's kind of a weaving together of like old world myth and like the early days of film, especially in Canada, and then just strong familiar relationships as well. So this is an awesome book. I can't say too much about it because I don't want to spoil anything, but highly recommend this one as well. So those are my recommendations. You should buy those books, but you should really, before that, buy all of our books.
Let's open it up to questions,
Oh wait,
or do you want to do?
Can we do one thing before that? Sorry. I just wanted to announce the events that are going to be coming up and then I grabbed a few books from like the guests of honor and some of the, so I just wanted to mention a couple of those before. So, I'm sorry, I'm David Agranoff, part of HWA. We're going to be doing an event towards the end of March at Artifact Books as part of the countdown in Encinitas. We haven't finalized the date yet, should have that in a day or two. Then in April, we're going to be doing an event possibly at 2 locations of the San Diego Library, downtown and possibly Mission Valley because it's close to where StokerCon is. And the idea is we're going to be putting together reading groups, and they're going to have copies at the library where you can check out books by people who are coming to StokerCon, and trying to start like a StokerCon like reading group heading up to it. Also working on potentially doing a film screening from some of the filmmakers that are at StokerCon. I'm having a hard time nailing down which filmmakers will be there or not be there, so I'm working on that. But Jonathan Mayberry, who's one of our locals, is one of the guests of honor. I picked up his first Joe Ledger book. He's written 8,000 of these since then. Basically, Jonathan Mayberry writes a book while we are in the bathroom. Jonathan is insane. He's a machine. I'm jealous of his schedule. But yeah, so. And then we already mentioned Paul Tremblay. And he's going to be in the guest of honor. This is the one that became Knock at the Cabin, Cabin at the End of the World, Survivor Song, which I like a little better. This is a pandemic book that came out in April of 2020. Lucky him. Very, very good. Paul's amazing. He's a basketball nerd like me, so is Josh Mallerman. I have challenged them to a 3-point shooting contest. We'll see if that happens. Josh Mallerman wrote Bird Box, and he has a new short story collection called Spin a Black Yarn that's over there. Mallerman is incredibly well rated, but still underrated. He's an amazing writer. Bird Box was, yes, the Netflix sensation, and he's just awesome, cool dude. And so these guys are all going to be at StokerCon, and then a few other ones. Philip Fracassi, Boys in the Valleys is one of the best horror novels of the year last year. I got it here signed. I know this is probably signed. Alma Katsu is a great writer. She's amazing, writes historical horror. She's a regular at StokerCon. So not sure she's going to be there, but she said see you at StokerCon, so I think so. So Alma is great. And then I wanted to put a shout out to, well, Grady Hendrix, who wrote Paperbacks from Hell, and this is Final Girl Support Group. who wrote How to Sell a Haunted House. He's usually there. And then another See You at StokerCon was the author of this one, Fever House by Keith Rawson. You've read this one, right?
No, I have not.
You have never read this one yet?
Nope.
This is like Pulp Fiction meets horror kind of thing, where like
Sweet.
an enforcer finds the devil's hand in a Wonder Bread bag in a
Great
freezer.
cover.
That sounds great.
Great cover.
Sold.
Yeah. So it's this hand right there. Yeah. It's really good. And then, but if you follow HWA, you can find out about the different events that are happening. I'm sorry I don't have everything locked down. But we're going to be doing all kinds of other stuff. But the most important thing is to get involved in StokerCon, and we still need volunteers. So you can get involved that way too. And this is a rare opportunity that we have this here in our city. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing these events, to get the ball rolling so people know what a unique opportunity this is, because all these amazing horror geniuses from all the world are coming. And now you can do it.
Yes, I should mention the other guests of honor as well. Paula Garan, Justina Ireland, Nisi Shaw. They're all amazing. And we have one or two more we may be announcing soon. It'll be a good group. I also did want to mention there's a book called 101 Books to Read Before You're Murdered by Sadie Hartman, which is a great reference if you're looking for more horror books. It's a beautifully bound, illustrated book. And people use it actually when they meet authors they like, to have them sign their entry in it. So that can be something fun to bring to StokerCon also.
When we did Deep Cuts, we did something really interesting. It was we were honoring women horror writers, but it's not just a women-only story book. We had everybody contribute to this. It's a great reference book if you're looking for women in horror. So we do a lot of short essays on women. Let's see. Should we do some Q&A?
Maybe 5 minutes?
Yeah,
one or two.
If anybody has any questions.
Once we're out of time.
You can also ask us questions like after this while you're
Yeah,
buying our books.
right.
And we're signing
Where is
them for you.
StokerCon going to be?
It's at the Marriott Mission Valley.
Okay.
Everybody's welcome to come up here. I have these little I heart horror buttons, so you can pick one up for free. You can get the bibliography right here. If you want us to like walk you to the shelves and like hand you some books, we will start with our books first, right, Brian? And then
Yeah, did I mention that our books are for sale?
if there's no questions, how about we do this? Everybody just go down and tell us what's new for you, what's coming up, and where you're going to be next.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, like I said, my next book is coming out from Blackstone on October 1st. It's called Good Dogs. It's a werewolf book. I will be at StokerCon, and I will probably be doing a bunch of other events to support my book that's coming out. So, yeah.
Nice. So the second one of my Melinda West series, these are standalone, but it's in the same world, is coming out in May 2025. I'm also have some exciting projects coming up, but I can't announce them yet. And I have some short stories coming out this year as well. You can follow me on my website or social media for updates. I'm just KC Grifant, pretty much on all the socials.
The second book in the Magica series is coming out. I promise it'll be by the end of this month. I'm getting a lot of like people going, "Where is this book?" My writers group, Wiley Writers, and if you are a writer and you are interested in this kind of system that we've developed for ourselves, just go to wileywriters.com. We will have a booth at Tucson Festival of Books. For March 9th and 10th, and then I will also be at StokerCon too this year. So, all right. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thank you all.
For the Serious Galaxy and
I mean, we're excited for StokerCon, so really glad you all could be here. I heard a CJ Lead reference. She will be in, we'll have her in store April 23rd with Liz Karen, so if anyone's free that day, could be a really fun event. I think it will be. all that's to say, thank you all so much for being here. We do have books for sale from these 3 fabulous authors, so if you wanted to get them signed, because here you are in this intimate moment, you can get them signed, maybe like a little note, something fun, who knows.
I draw pictures.
Right, draw pictures. So we'll have those for you. Everyone up there is ready to help, but we're gonna transition this part so that people can get their books signed and do that. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you all. Oh, and I have like free bookmarks up here if you want to grab a bookmark.
Yeah,
And I think
free stuff.
everyone has